Okay, it looks like I have some sound, so I'm ready to go here. As I mentioned, the last 2 weeks of the course, modules 14 and 15, are flex time, and there's no class. Now, this week, this module 14, what I'm going to do is I will pre-record a couple of screencasts for some work that will be due. As I mentioned, this right here is flex time, and the sessions will be pre-recorded so you can view them when you want to view them. But again, you're supposed to be using this week to work on flex time, to work on what's due on module 15. Okay, and then in module 15, which is the week of the 3rd of December, you'll be smart if you have all the work done for module 15, so you can start working on the finals or however you work it out. But for all intents and purposes, I'm giving you module 12, excuse me. Okay, which was flex time. And I had some, I also had some class, the flex time, okay, for module 12. And then I also am giving you flex time in module 14, okay? And you have a couple of assignments due, but I'm pre-recording the screencast, so I'll go through them. And then in week 15, you have the SAP assignment as well as the Anderson text assignment. So if you're smart, you'll be budgeting your time and also working. You should be working on your finals, at least the part that's due at the start of the final exam period. And I wouldn't underestimate these because I've got several things there for you to do, and it's going to be a test. Those of you who've been paying attention to these screencasts, who've been watching, you're going to be in pretty decent shape. If you've been kind of hit and miss on it, you'll pay the price. And that is, you'll be lost as a goose in a rainstorm. So, I've given you the opportunity, and like I said, I'm going to do pre-recorded sessions for this week, and then I'll post those in the announcements. And then for next week, during that flex time, I'll be there just for like Q&A if you have any questions, and I'll post a weekly schedule, and like the Q&A for this course, I'll have a special link for you guys, and then I'll have virtual office hours, regular office hours, the whole bit. Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do here is we're going to take a look at the order of business. We're going to be coming out of the Thanksgiving weekend, is to review the PDC model. So I have a key here for you, and I'm going to publish it. And we'll take a look at it. And remember, this all dealt with that chapter, dealing with decision theory and making decisions under uncertainty. And as you see, we use the PDC tree, or we use a tree model to say, okay, well, if I make a decision at point A, then I have outcomes B and C, or I could have possible outcomes of B, C, D, and E. But then I attach probabilities of success or probabilities of some type of reward or profit or whatever, and I set in motion before that. I put probabilities of which condition is going to be operable, and you can see that here in the PDC. And I'm going to put this all into full screen so you can see. We start out here with 2 tracks, okay, and we end up with the outcomes for them, and you can notice that this is the this is from the PDC model where they're trying to decide if they're going to build I think it's a set of condominiums or townhouses, and they have three possible states of nature. One is, that the demand is weak, that the demand is average, and the demand is good, or low, medium, and high. And they attached probabilities to each of those, and then possible payoffs given the particular path that we travel. Okay. And there I had asked you to show me in the base case, and then to do a scenario 1 based upon these instructions up here. And in scenario 1, I ask you to change that cell from 80 to 70%. Okay. And then in scenario 2, I ask you to change the cell from 80% to 60%. And then in scenario 3, I ask you to take it from 80 to 55%. Now, this is a nice rendering of it. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to download the file so we can take a look at it and see the dynamics that are going on. Now, the thing that's important is, and I mentioned this before, is to remember is that any of these decision-making models are only as good as your assessment of the external environment or the conditions under which you operate, okay? And only as good as the payoff, only as good as your estimate of the potential payoff given a particular state of nature, in other words, conditions, say market conditions, and your response, okay? And here's the base case. And of course, this is now this is covered over in the text, I believe in chapter 13. But you could see, and let me walk you through this. We have, you'll notice that we're going to choose the maximum from among these alternatives. And notice that we have the three branches of we have a decision to make, and there are three outcomes possible. That the demand is small, the demand is medium, or the demand is large. Okay? And there's an outcome for us based upon that. Now, what I want to emphasize again is that decision making is not binary. It's not an issue of it's right or it's wrong. It has a continuous output, but it has continuous variables ranging from the really, really bad to the really, really good to, well, yeah, this is pretty much what I expected. Okay. Then you also have to think outside of that model and say, okay, what would be the unintended consequences if I do this? All right. And again, at its core, the decision-making process is that matrix that I showed you. We're on the horizontal line. Okay, it's a box with squares and four squares. Okay, or it could be it could be a square, it could be a rectangle. But you're going to have at the top the conditions, or what we call states of nature, our assumptions about how things are outside in the world, or how a competitor might react, or any of that. And then on the vertical, we're going to have our alternatives. What is it we're going to do? And then when we look at the intersection of the alternative or option that we choose and the state of nature we choose, we get some type of utility, or a reward, a profit, whatever. Okay. Now, we attach probabilities to those by attaching probabilities to the states of nature. All right. And we see this here when we think that we have that we have a 20% weak, okay, or an 80% strong. Here we have a 20% weak, okay, or an 80% strong in terms of the medium outcome. And then on the large, on medium, decision to build a medium-sized set of condominiums. And then the large, we've got 20% weak, 20% strong, and it just walks us through those permutations. Okay. Now, over in this data table, we have the probability of strong demand, and notice that we put it in tiers of a 0.10 to 0.20, 0.30, etc. You could put that into 0 to 0.005. It doesn't matter. Okay. But what this tells you again is these probabilities, you end up with a 1.0 for the strong probability, and that is, absolutely for sure that there's going to be a strong demand. That's rare. What's more likely is you're going to see stuff, if it's obvious that there's a strong demand, you're probably going to be somewhere around about the 70 to 90% range. And then here's the expected value, and I'm going to click on it. Okay. And notice it says it equals A16. And let's go down here to A16, and there's the expected value. You say this sounds a whole lot like I'm doing in finance, where I would do an expected value table. Pretty much the same, yeah. Pretty much the same. Now you'll notice here that we use a table function, and we use H1. And let's click on that for a minute. And we're going to go through and choose that. And we've handled this like a function. So I'll escape that here for a moment. And we're using a table, and then we use H1, okay, as a parameter on that. And you want to go and take a look at the table function. You remember we back in 1123 we did a 2-variable table, and to do a sensitivity analysis where we compared, I think it was annual income versus interest rates on a capital budgeting project. Well, in this we're doing a single variable table, okay, and we create that function there by inserting it within those they're not brackets. I forget what those things are called, but the little symbol. But for all intents and purposes, you're just looking at one variable. So we get those expected values, and then we make a choice on what is the best decision. Okay, and here we use the choose function, and then we show the target. And I'll just open this up dialog box and I'll show us this. The index number, okay, the value. So it uses a cell or the value in the cell as an index, okay? And it specifies which argument, is to be selected. And if we see here in each one of these cases, based upon this base case, we end up with a 7.7046. And in each case, that is the value that we would choose in terms of the probability of strong demand. That's the highest output that we get, given what we think will be the states of nature. Now, I ask you to do some work here, and let's look at scenario number 1, because we've done the best case. Now, here in scenario number 1, we're going to change cell H1 from 80% to 70%. Okay. And so what we're saying is that the probability, okay, is 70% for the strong in each point. Or in our base case, we said that the strong was 80%. But now we're going to say, okay, well, if we think there's a 70% chance that we'll have a strong demand, then we run the probabilities, we get our expected values. And in each of those and in that case, then we end up with a small demand, the small demand. But notice something, okay? We see some changes, okay, in the outcome. And if you look at A16, you'll see that it's decreased. And again, we use that table function. Then over in scenario 2, we change scenario 1. We change the demand for strong from 80% to 60%. Okay. And notice that we get the maximum. We choose the maximum from among those incomes, from those expected values. If you look over here, if you look down here in cell E26 and E27, you can see what a disastrous thing it would be if we went ahead and built a large townhouse, and in fact, a set of townhouses, and in fact, the demand was weak. So as I've spoken, as I've said before, okay, we are almost always going to see a wide range if we do this correctly, and we'll have to decide then. You can input the data into this model. Ultimately, a human being has to have the experience to make a good decision given the data they have. Okay, and again, this is all as good as the data that you get. Then in the third scenario, I ask you to change H1 from 80% to 55%. So now we're almost down to a point where what we perceive to be the demand level is strong. 55% chance it will have a strong demand, a 45% chance it will have weak demand. Okay, so why aren't you dealing with the medium? Well, we do in the middle part of the tree, but we want to make sure that we understand some of the extremes. That's why I had you guys do that case with the outliers a couple of weeks ago, because it's the outliers that will give us a sense of the risk involved. In other words, it will give us a sense of how wide a variation we have in potential outcomes. And the wider the variation, the greater the risk that's attached. Now, you could make some decisions as a manager to say, okay, we'll build this thing piecemeal. We'll build part of it now if the demand's strong. You could say, we'll build the whole thing regardless of what the demand level is. All right. And we may just say, all right, to get a cash flow, we might just go ahead and rent these out at a loss just so you get them occupied. And then over time, hopefully, as we have turnover in tenants, we build up the income. Now that's a long kind of view, and one that you better have the deep pockets to absorb it. Now the other would be, and there's nothing in the case that I see they talk about, you could build townhouses with the townhouse complex, but with some different amenities so that you've got some different price points. Okay? And that would be perhaps one way to attack it. But again, this is just a way for you to see how the variability of these expected values. And here in scenario 3, when we have nearly even, where our view is that the demand is roughly about equal, that we'll have a strong demand versus weak. And that means you're in a very, very uncertain environment. Well, that's what PDC is designed to do, and to help to give you a sense of the range and a way to organize your thoughts and put some expected probabilities to these outcomes, and then compute the expected values. All right, and you can see almost in every one of these cases, we end up with strong with the best decision is small. Okay. And you can see that. So that's the PDC case. I'm going to close this up because I think we talked so much about this. I think we've pretty much exhausted what we need to do to talk about there. So I'm going to go back to the module. Again, that chapter 13 is absolutely crammed with all of the techniques and tools that we use in decision theory. It's an overview of them. A tree approach. We look at strategizing, minimize my maximum loss, maximize my minimum gain, maxi-max, min, looking at the expected value of perfect information, those techniques. So it covers a lot of material in a fairly cursory fashion, okay, because we would really almost, chapter 13 would itself be a course. And as I've said, as we get into these more complex models like queuing theory, like decision making under uncertainty, the amount of we take, because we're in an intro course, we're a mile wide and about a half an inch deep. So you'd have to really take a deep dive, but it's there for you if you choose to take a look at all of that. Now, you also, I'm going to ask you to upload the scoring and the AHP, okay? And those are due on the 30th. All right, let's look at the AHP and talk about it. Now, we're going to use the analytical hierarchy process, okay? And this file is a demo, okay? And it supplements the text discussions. I mentioned that here. And you can use this to submit your work. Now, I'm going to go over here to, and I want to go over here to, I'll move this out of the way for just a second. I'll open up a new tab. And I want to go over to Vital Source. again. I should have done this earlier. I apologize. The value of a tool like we had with the PDC, with the tree model that was there, is that we can let the computer do the math and we can do the thinking. Okay. That's the only way I know to put it to you, because if you know, again, and there we were over in chapter 13, okay, decision making without probabilities, then with probabilities attached. So we get expected values. So we're going to go over now to chapter 14. And these are what we call multi-criteria decision making. And they were trying to handle a set of priorities, okay? And the authors want to make sure that we see this, so they do a little bit of they do an analysis of shares of oil, of U.S. oil versus the number of shares of what are those, of some properties, and they show us a feasible portfolio. So anything within this area, okay, is feasible, and it's based upon our available funds constraint. And they'll walk you through some more of the mathematic proofs of that and the graphic proofs for you to see. They walk us through that process, okay? This is the HUD properties. So we have some goal programming. I'll get us over to the HP. Now this moves us into the scoring models, okay? Now you'll want to take a look at this, because we use the scoring models so we can create hierarchies in terms of what we want to do. And here's one they're using this as an example of this person who's going to take a new job, and they've got these criteria and then the weights for those criteria. And using that, they do a scoring model to determine the composite that works for them. Now, here's the AHP, the analytical hierarchy process, and we'll talk some more about this on Wednesday when I do the screencast for your Wednesday. But the bottom line is, it's, you know, as they tell you, it's designed to handle multi-criteria decision probabilities. So we have a series of decisions to make, okay, or a multiple set of priorities, and so we want to put those priorities in some kind of order, okay? And here they're talking about buying a car, and there are multiple criteria: price, miles per gallon, comfort, and style. Remember, when we started, we were doing optimization, okay? And remember, we were using the solver to choose an objective function, okay? Now, here we're moving away from that to saying, okay, I've got a series of objective functions, if you will, or outcome, or decision variables, processes, decision variables that I want to take into account. And we can see it's price, miles per gallon, comfort, style. And then here we see a matrix that puts this into perspective. Now, this individual is going to choose between an Accord, a Taurus, or a Cruise, okay? And they've got the characteristics over here that are important to them. The key, these are like the variables, the changing values. And then we see we have values attached for each one of these. So we have, the price for the Accord, the Taurus, and we've selected those characteristics that are important to us. Now, if you're a marketing student, this is important to you because you want to know, for example, what are the things that would motivate a person to buy a particular car? It's not just going to be price point. And again, it's simply the buy decision's a little more complex than I like the color of the car. Okay. Now, what happens is after someone purchases a vehicle, particularly a new vehicle, and they have a good experience with the vehicle, and I think a key piece of that is certainly with the service, those who service the vehicle, you build some brand loyalty. And because you do, that's very difficult for people to dislodge. But here we see these decision criteria, okay? And so if you look here at figure 14.6, you're going to see the hierarchy. The overall goal was we want to select the best car. That's our objective function, if you will. But now, instead of we have values attached to these, but you can see, okay, that we have the criteria, and then then we see the decision alternatives. And so we're going to try to work through developing the hierarchy, okay, based on some scoring methods. And this is where they talk about establishing priorities. Okay. And we're looking at price versus miles per gallon versus comfort versus style. Notice what happens here is we end up doing pairwise comparisons. That's why I gave you folks an example over there over the scoring model. And let me pop in over here for a second. And we'll see this also when we do scoring. Now when you get over there. This is why I'm giving you some of these, and this will be better if I go over to the modules here for a minute, okay? Then I encourage you to go over and visit and take a look at these resources. The theory of bounded rationality and satisficing, that is, decision makers work within a boundary of what they know. Remember, when I've always done that matrix, known and unknown states of nature, known and unknown alternatives, okay? And again, decision makers have bounded rationality. They only know so much. There's a lot of unknown. There's usually more unknown than there is known. And when they make a decision, the law of unintended consequences is indeed there. It will happen. So you'll make a decision, but there will be things that will happen as a result of that you hadn't expected. Okay, and then then I've got a link there for you about Pareto efficiency and his ideas about that. And then the reciprocal lattice, that's when we do the scoring, that's a model, okay, from the physical sciences that we apply and use. Remember, we always look for something, some model out there that we can use. And the more mathematical, the purer, the better, because if it's mathematical, then we can manipulate variables, and then we can do simulations before we make a decision, okay? And then I've got a resource there for you on weighting by pairwise comparison, okay? And there's some material here where we're doing that, we're pairing them up. And here we start to see that, that this person, Diane Payne, her pairwise comparisons of the 4 criteria, price versus miles per gallon, price versus comfort, price versus style, okay? It's just like a tournament, I guess you could say. MPG versus comfort, MPG versus style, and then comfort versus style. And you choose which one's more important to you of those 2 criteria, okay? And then how much more important is it? Then you attach a numerical rating. And she used a scale of 1 to 4 here. Now, as the authors say, not everybody would agree with this, but this is a nice model for anybody, particularly if you're in marketing, to say what is important to people when they buy the product or use our website or whatever. Okay, there's got to be a reason for people to buy what you offer to sell. And then we see the pairwise comparison matrix. And you can note that we have these already. And then they'll walk us through as it develops. And how we end up with the full matrix. Then we begin to synthesize those data. And we divide, and here in step 2, we divide each element of the matrix by its column total. What we're doing here is we're creating a ratio so that we have a pure data. We're wrangling the data a little bit so that we have pure data to compare. We'll talk some more about this on Wednesday. And then walk you through some of the math there we'll be working with. And again, it's just a way for us to take a decision and break it down in terms of key criteria that are driving our decision, and then comparing criteria to find out, to create a hierarchy of criteria, okay? What's most important, second most important, third. Now, this is done intuitively by just about everybody. They just don't take it apart like this. And sometimes, particularly if those of you who are marketing students, you're going to find there'll be times that if you follow this approach, if you collect data about folks, what is it, what made you buy this or try it, you'll be surprised. There's always going to be some variable you didn't expect, or something you just thought, oh, I don't get this. Okay. And you can see as they begin to get you consistency, they build a consistency, that's the RI, the consistency ratio. Now we can do our comparisons. And they walk us right through that whole process, and it's there in the key, right? So I'm going to go back over here, and I'll when the time comes, I will upload the I'll make the scoring key, I'll make it public so you can see it, so it's published. Yeah, pardon me, AHP. All right. And again, as I mentioned, I wanted to also to take a look at these resources. Now, you say, well, you give me some stuff to think about. It's flex time. Yes. But I will publish the keys so you can upload them and get the screen, you get the workshop credit, but I do expect you to be working on your other work. We're not having class per se. You can see this at any time you want. So you can spend your time working on your assignments and look at this at 8 o'clock, tomorrow night or whatever, and I'll have those for you. Now, I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about Herbert Simon, okay? And he was an economist, and this is I think, a free article that you can take a look at over at The Economist. But he talked about satisficing and sufficing. In other words, that we, in our decision-making, particularly in larger organizations, we tend to satisfice. That is, we tend to choose typically the lowest common denominator in terms of a decision, okay? And also the idea of bounded rationality, right? It's interesting to me. Now, over the years when I've taught, especially in MBA programs, and I've had somebody who I've had a few people, students, maybe a dozen, who were physicians. They had a medical degree, and they were getting their MBA. And for them, it was a struggle because they live in a world where you're dealing with physical laws and physical things. Out in the world of business, only after a transaction has occurred are you dealing with reality. And even that is shrouded in, why did they do it? And you could add, and that's why consumer surveys are so notoriously bad. Or a survey of buyer interests. And so they would have some great frustration in dealing with this and looking at case studies, and because they just simply that they have a bounded rationality. I've had students who would come into one of my courses like this, a management science course, who was an accounting major or a marketing major or a finance major, and they just couldn't wrap their head around the course because they'd been so ingrained in how they did things or thought that they just could not get it. Okay, so this idea of bounded rationality is quite important. And look, when you leave here with your bachelor's degree and you go to work, you're going to go to work for some company in some industry, all right? And you're going to learn that business, but you'll have a bounded rationality. It'll be bounded by your experience, your training, and because managers make decisions on the basis of very limited information almost all the time, we have to take that into account. So this article talks about that and how we have to be cautious when we're decision making about that problem of satisficing and that problem of bounded rationality. The Bible says, the Proverbs says, Proverbs admonishes us, seek the counsel of many. Get as many viewpoints as you can if you're going to make a decision. Now we get satisficing versus optimizing, and we've learned all about optimization, where we've said, okay, given my constraints and my and my objective function, that is what I want to achieve, what's the optimal way to do this? Well, I have a link here for you to take a look at that, because satisficing and optimization are not the same. There are often times when you'll come up with a decision that is, especially in a larger organization, where it's politically sound, it works for everybody, but it's not the optimal decision. Okay? One of the ways this happens is when an organization just simply ignores its market. It ignores the realities of the marketplace. It ignores the realities of what's going on around it. It ignores the reality of its top competitors. I'll give you an example. In education, in higher education, there are many small universities that are in the middle of the sea, okay? And there are some humongous universities that are in the middle of the sea that have the capacity to put them out of business. You say, well, how would that happen? Simple. Price point, convenience, convincing young people coming out of high school that why should you go off somewhere and pay money to live there and all that when you can live at home and work and you get your education online. Spare yourself all that other trouble. And boy, if it's price point appropriately, that can be bad news. Or accelerated scheduling or anything of that nature. And this is no different than what Walmart did to all the mom and pop stores, all the central business districts. When they placed their stores, they were out in the country originally, near kind of a regional city or hub, and they'd plant themselves, and then they'd just suck all the business out of the downtowns. And they did that through pricing and variety, having it all in one place. Now, how they got the pricing breaks was from their vendors. The people who sold to them had to deal with some pretty harsh terms if Walmart was going to handle your product. Okay, so there's a difference between the two of these. Now, this is an excellent resource on Pareto efficiency, and my hunch is that you've never even heard of this. You're probably at your econ courses, they probably never even talked about it, because Pareto is not a supply side conservative kind of trickle down economist. Most economists, if you've taken classes in econ, let me tell you what, you've got a steady diet of the market will fix everything. You've got a steady diet of the less government intervention, the better. You've got a steady diet of, the invisible hand and all that. Listen, that's great stuff, but there are some alternative ways of looking at things. And I can tell you that when we came to the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, as I visited with my colleagues, I was really surprised to find some who were just willing to say, okay, let the banks fail. Okay. Well, if they had we would probably have triggered a worldwide recession. What happened did anyway. We may have triggered a depression, because the United States in 1929, because government wouldn't act properly, our economy came undone. A third of the people in the United States in the workforce were out of work. We had 10,000 bank failures. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 60% of its value within a week. So there's some limits to all that stuff. Pareto is another one. Pareto talks about optimization, okay, and what he calls in the term of Pareto in efficiencies versus inefficiencies. And he talks about, you know, the win lose type of proposition that supply side economics argues for. It argues for, and you see these people, right? Well, we're disrupting the market. Okay, typically you're disrupting the market because you're maybe either leveraging technology, or you may just be flat doing something you probably shouldn't do. But you want, basically what he argues is that in a Pareto efficiency means that we move away from that that win-lose kind of scenario to a win-win. And you can read what he has to say. He has a manual of political economy, and the authors here provide an excellent example of that. Okay. And I do want you to take a look at what he has to say. All right, and we'll move on here. This is the reciprocal lattice. Now, this is borrowed from the physical sciences. As you notice, you know, it starts with a potential, and what people that work with diamonds and crystals use this theory because they want to see the refractive power or purity of a particular gem. And the nice thing is that this is a great model for us to use when we do pairwise scoring or pairwise comparisons. So this is the mathematical or scientific basis through which we can build these models. And so I want you to encourage you to take a look at it, just simply because, again, we always look for a model out, particularly in the physical sciences, that we can come in and apply. And then here's a resource on weighting by pairwise comparison, and walks you through that. And this is from the Geographic Information Technology Training Alliance, and they'll walk you through that process. And you'll have to have you probably need a Adobe going, but you can see they have indexes, and then a closing assessment. You may have to go ahead and run your Adobe to see that. So that takes us through the module, and again, this whole notion of where we've moved into this. We last in module 12. Okay, we looked at decision making under uncertainty, and attaching probabilities to the states of nature, thus giving us an expected value based on our choice. All right. Now, in this module, we're saying, okay, I have multiple criteria. I'm not just concerned about profit, but I've got multiple criteria that I'm trying to work with. And so I use these models, the analytical hierarchy process, and then the scoring model to help me make these complex decisions. Okay, and we'll talk some more about that on Wednesday. We'll talk some more about that in the pre-record I'll do for you for Wednesday. Okay, I think I'll wrap it up for now, and be looking for this also be looking for the pre-recorded session for Wednesday. You can see it whenever you want I'll be available either in Shawnee or online remote for questions and answers during your flex week time.